There Lance lay, and he didn't move. He was sleeping, and Violet, well, both could tell this was sleep. He was sleeping soundly. He wasn't shivering. Before long, the shivering stopped. And so they sat, and after a little while, uh, Elaine said to her, Gma, Gma, who's Wedge? And Violet just answered, he was once an old friend. Uh, you know, Elaine said, you've never spoken of him. And Violet said, there was no need to. Then she said, will you take over here? And I've got some stuff to do. And she left. And so there Elaine sat watching the sleeping Lance. And it's a good time, I think, for me to tell you a little bit about Elaine and how she ended up getting there. She was Violet's granddaughter, the daughter of her older son, and he had gotten a very good job at the United Nations. He was in the diplomatic corps, and he served in Georgia for a couple years. Now, I'm not talking about the state of Georgia, I'm talking about the country of Georgia. In Tbilisi, that was where he was stationed. He wasn't there all that long. But while he had been there, he met or saw Elaine's mother. And he was just blown away by her. She was a singer in Tbilisi. And she was a star, actually. And he was just so taken with her. And he'd seen her singing in a performance, and then afterward tried to go back and meet her or see her again sometime, but she'd left. She'd gone back to her village. And Robert, no, yeah, Robert, I think, was the older son's name. I got to think about that. It might have been David. Well, anyway, I'll call him David. And David didn't speak any Georgian. Georgian's a hard language, and he didn't speak any Georgian. But in spite of that, he was determined that that woman was not going to get away. He had to meet her. He had to see her again. So he went out into the countryside by himself, renting a car, and he found the village where she lived. And there he met her, and they courted. To make a long story short, they married. Now, why she married him, that's a little hard to understand because, I mean, he was a wonderful guy. I mean, he had a good job. He was polite. There was everything to like about him, but he was an American. And if she married him, she was going to have to leave Georgia. But she did. The only explanation for it really is love. And she went with him, and they went back to the United States, and there he was stationed at the UN, near the UN building. And because of that, he had to live in Manhattan. That's where Violet had been born. And while she was being raised, her mother was by far her best friend. And I wish I could tell you her mother's name. I just don't remember what it was. So I'll just call her mother. And but Violet had not done well in school. She was not really all that happy there. And so they got all the closer. They tried going to the UN school, sending her to the United Nations school. That seemed like it would work. It didn't. And then they tried her in public school. And that didn't work either. It wasn't that she wasn't a good student. She just wasn't happy. There were no other kids really like her. She came to speak Georgian fluently because her mother spoke to her in Georgian a lot, and more importantly, her mother sang to her all the time these Georgian folk songs, and so they were really close. And what was going to happen was probably she'd be raised like that and they'd be okay. But her mother was killed in an accident. She was hit by a bus, And no one knows for sure how that really could have happened. I have my own theory. Her mother missed her homeland. She missed those mountains of Georgia severely. And she dealt with it because she had followed her man and she was in love. But I think she was probably in the habit of going into a reverie of remembering her homeland. And I suspect that that's what happened, and she didn't see the bus coming. Anyway, she was killed, so there was a sudden tragedy there. Then began, I think that Violet was about 12 years old when that happened. Then began a kind of a long, slow tragedy for Violet because she had lost her best friend. Homeschooling, other kind of schooling just didn't work, and she wasn't old enough. The only places she was really happy in Manhattan, or not so sad, was if she went to, say, the zoo or a public park or the botanical garden, places like that, Central Park. But she wasn't really old enough to do that by herself. It was a dilemma. And her dad, David, I'm calling, he didn't know what to do. He thought about his mom and two aunts. Maybe they could help. Well, both of those aunts lived in Maine. There was Sage, the oldest, and there was Rosemary. And that might have worked. And it certainly would have worked, I think, if Rosemary owned some land in New Hampshire. And if she had lived on that land, David suspected that would maybe work. He himself was also in such mourning that wouldn't go away because Violet's mother really, Elaine's mother really was the love of his life. So finally they decided that they would try Violet. Now Violet lived in a city, which seemed to be part of the trouble for Elaine. She lived in the city of Richland, but she had such a joie de vivre, I think they call it, a joy of life. She was such a happy person in so many ways that they thought, well, maybe they'll try that. And that had worked out perfectly. That had worked out. Elaine and her Gma were so happy together. They were schooled, and that would explain to you maybe how she ended up where she was. Now there's lots more to tell you about Elaine, but I'll save that for a little later.